She didn't even look at me when she said it, just flicked her eyes toward the head of security and muttered, "She can be escorted out." Like I was a delivery to be rerouted. Like I hadn't built the veins of this company she was now so eager to strip clean and modernize. There were 9 people in that room. Chloe, her legal bulldog, 2 of the fresh-faced consultants she imported like exotic pets, and 5 execs I used to share coffee with every Monday morning. Not one made eye contact. Not even when I stood, took off my badge and slid it across the conference table like a dealer folding a hand I never lost. I watched her attorney reach for it, casual, cocky, and flip it over. His fingers stopped, just froze there, then a small twitch, the kind you don't notice unless you've trained yourself to see when men realize they've made a mistake. He leaned closer, whispered something to Chloe. Her eyes finally lifted. Before we go any deeper, do me one favor. If you're one of the 97% who listens but never subscribes, hit that button and give this video a like. It keeps these stories coming, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Anyway, back to the moment she finally blinked. There was something beautiful about it, the quiet dread bleeding into her voice as she asked, "What does it mean, forensic trace signature active?" I didn't answer. I just smiled. The kind of smile you give someone who thinks they're kicking down a door without realizing it was wired to the mainframe. But let me rewind, because this story doesn't start with a standoff in a boardroom. It starts years earlier, with me in an empty office on a Sunday night, eating cold sesame noodles out of a takeout box and rewriting the entire customs data sync layer because no one else understood why the buffers were spitting garbage during rollover hours. That's who I was. The invisible architect. The woman who always made sure the planes landed on time, the warehouses never overfilled, and the regulatory buffers held even when the system clock drifted a few milliseconds. No one celebrated that. But they relied on it, completely. I wasn't flashy. No TED Talks, no LinkedIn soliloquies. I kept my head down, wore the same 3 cardigans on rotation, and quietly earned the trust of every CTO, COO, and compliance chief Darnell Freight Technologies ever had. 3 CEOs came and went. Each one asked for my counsel when the system hiccuped. Each one approved my badge architecture protocols when we moved to trace certified access under the new logistics audit rules. Then came Chloe. You know the type. Harvard case study haircut. Streamlining vocabulary. Fresh off a reorg from some boutique accelerator with a name like Alt Capital or Prism Edge. She called herself a systems thinker. But I never saw her log into anything more technical than Slack. Her first week, she gave a speech about sunsetting legacy mindsets. I remember it because she used the phrase twice and said resilient disruption with a straight face. She was the kind of leader who needed mirrors, not maps. And I wasn't reflective enough. The first cuts came fast. Procurement got halved. Vendor ops was consolidated under sales, which made absolutely no sense, but okay. Then she started sniffing around core infra, my department. She brought in some Deloitte kids with fresh MBAs and startup dreams and had them evaluate our architecture. I wasn't invited to the first few meetings. When I asked, I was told I was too close to the legacy stack. Legacy. That's what they call you right before they gut what you built and try to wear the skeleton like it was theirs. But here's the thing about systems like the one I built. They remember. They remember who authored which block, who signed the trace certs, who embedded the logic for cascading fallback controls. You don't just restructure that. Especially not when those controls are legally tied to the physical badge of the licensed architect, me. I had designed it that way for security, for integrity, for compliance, honestly, not for revenge, not yet. Still, the moment she said it, she can be escorted out. I felt something click. Not panic, not fear, just an internal switch. Like the last domino tipping gently into place. I left without a word. No scene, no dramatic exit speech, just the sound of her lawyer whispering into her ear as I walked out the door with nothing but my coat and my calm. And outside, past the glass atrium with the sculpture they overpaid for, I breathed in the winter air and I smiled. Because by the time they realized what I'd taken with me, it'd be too late. I hadn't stolen anything. I didn't need to. I'd simply walked away with what was always mine. And I knew it wouldn't take long before the badge started talking back. It started with parking spots. That's how these regimes always announce themselves, by repainting asphalt. The front row of reserved slots suddenly had shiny new plaques with job titles that didn't exist last week. VP System Strategy, Director of Ops Reinvention, Global Workflow Synergy Lead. Titles that smelled like cologne and PowerPoints. And right behind those spots came the consultants, dozens of them. Some fresh from McKinsey, others with brittle smiles and thick binders of buzzwords. They swarmed the offices like locusts with MBAs, observing workflows and interviewing staff with phrases like, "How would you quantify your daily value contribution?" I watched quietly from my usual spot, third desk from the window, 2 monitors, same coffee mug I'd had since the Jenkins rollback crisis in 2016. I didn't push back. Yet. Then, Chloe announced the structural realignment phase. That was the name she gave to gutting half the leadership team. Procurement, QA, vendor oversight, all rolled into something called the Operational Resilience Pod, which reported directly to one of her personal picks, a man who used the word disruption as both noun and verb and once called our customs sync layer a vibe killer. It wasn't until she called a meeting about consolidating the ops and regulatory frameworks that I spoke up. I kept my tone even, professional. The architecture is laced with trace certs tied to core badge authority. They're embedded at the protocol level, not just in the access logs. If you merge systems without porting those properly, you'll trigger integrity violations across the relay layer. Chloe blinked once, then laughed. We'll recertify everything. I'll have legal draft new clearances. It's software. We overwrite it. That moment, that exact sentence, that was the tell. She thought infrastructure was like a Google Doc, that you could just highlight, delete, and pretend history didn't matter. She hadn't read the framework I implemented in 2019, hadn't noticed it was reviewed and ratified under Regulatory Operations Act 12B by 3 separate COOs, that it had been cross-logged with our trade compliance partners and had a notary seal buried in Appendix C, that every badge I issued under that system carried a trace signature and conditional authority key locked to the original architect. And that architect was me. To be clear, I hadn't done that for power. I did it because bad actors exist, because in logistics, traceability isn't a luxury, it's a mandate. When you're syncing real-time customs data across 5 jurisdictions with conflicting audit cycles, the system needs to know who touched what, when, and under what authority. And when you're trying to prevent export fraud, bad syncs, or multi-party invoice laundering, badge-linked trace certs are how you prove your house is clean. Chloe didn't know that, or didn't care. She went forward with the merger plan. Had her new Ops redesign squad start poking around the core relay stacks. They pinged one of the customs endpoints with test credentials, triggered a warning. 2 systems froze. One of them, our Hong Kong warehouse buffer sync, dropped into fallback mode and stopped transmitting ETA updates for 48 minutes. No one noticed, except the vendor in Kowloon who called my direct line. I forwarded the voicemail to Chloe's new team. No reply. That Friday, I got looped into a thread with legal. Hi, quick question. Can we get the source schema for the badge-based certs so we can replicate it in the restructured architecture? I read it twice, then archived the email. That weekend, I made a copy of my original deployment schema, notarized the licensing framework again, and filed a private record with internal control under Clause 7F. Just to be safe. Because I knew what was coming. It wasn't personal. It was pattern. I'd seen this before. New execs, desperate to leave a mark, wiping away history so they can pretend they built something from scratch. But I don't vanish easily. Not when the systems know my name. And certainly not when my badge is still the key. She hadn't crossed the line yet, but she was standing on the edge, and I was the one who buried the tripwire. Tuesday mornings used to smell like a burnt coffee and possibility. That day, it smelled like printer toner and war. I'd barely stepped off the elevator when I knew something was off. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes. My badge didn't beep at the security door. It opened anyway, silently, like it had been overridden. And when I walked into the 14th floor conference room, it wasn't a meeting. It was a stage. Chloe was already seated. Leather chair, arms crossed, eyes glued to her screen like I was interrupting something important. Beside her, the company lawyer, Martin Bell, a man who smiled like he was practicing for court depositions. And standing behind them, like set dressing for a corporate decapitation, were two security guards I'd never seen before. Suits too tight, hands folded, waiting for the nod. Chloe didn't even pretend to warm the air. "You've been non-collaborative," she said, still scrolling. "Obstructive, resistant to systemic innovation. This is effective immediately." She motioned to the guard with her chin like I was trash to be wheeled out. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't give her the satisfaction of confusion. I reached slowly into my blazer pocket, pulled out my badge, Ops Core Series 3 embedded with trace sig and dual key override, and slid it across the glossy surface of the table until it stopped in front of Martin. He reached for it with all the confidence of a man who thought he was ending something. And then he turned it over. The second his thumb touched the back panel, I saw it. Not panic. Not yet. But doubt. A twitch in the corner of his jaw. The subtle kind of facial static that happens when a legal mind suddenly feels like it missed a comma that might cost millions. That badge didn't just open doors. It was a door. A traceable, time-stamped access signature buried in every authenticated relay system tied to our logistics framework since 2020. He knew enough to know what that meant. But Chloe? She didn't even look up. Not yet. "Escort her out," she said. Final and casual, like she was ordering lunch. Martin didn't move, neither did the guards. I stood, adjusted my sleeves, buttoned the top of my coat with precision. One beat, two, no one spoke. And then I walked out. No dramatics, no turning around for one last word, no righteous monologue, just the quiet tick of my heels on engineered wood, the elevator hum, and the vague sense that a very large and very irreversible mistake had just been made. Outside, the December wind hit me square in the chest. I let it. I stood on the plaza for a moment, letting the cold slap the heat off my skin, letting the silence of it all settle in my bones. Then I walked. Not fast, not slow, just forward. Back at my apartment, I opened the secure channel, logged the badge status. It had already gone into dormant trace mode. That meant the system clock was still authenticating my cert as valid, and the cascade hadn't started yet. Good. They'd think I left quietly, that I'd been neutralized. They didn't know that the minute my badge was taken without a proper transfer signature, it would trigger a trace lock warning in the custom sync layer. They also didn't know that that badge had never been theirs. The funny thing is, I would have helped, if they'd asked, if they'd shown even a flicker of respect or caution or interest in how the thing actually worked. But Chloe didn't want understanding. She wanted a clean slate, and she was about to find out what happens when you wipe something that still remembers you. They had the badge. What they didn't have was the map, and the badge was already whispering. By Thursday morning, the system was wheezing. It started as a glitch, just a few missed scans on inbound freight. A pallet of lithium batteries from Shenzhen hit the dock without the usual clearance ping. Then, a shipment of specialty meds from Hamburg stalled in limbo. No customs pre-clearance, no trace cert, no timestamp confirmation. Operations thought it was just a bug in the sync layer. The new VP of Ops, some guy named Trevor who once called regulatory timing overcautious hand-holding, sent a chipper all-hands email titled, "Let's reboot these pipelines." But under the hood, the system wasn't sleeping. It was screaming. The warehouse sync nodes began lagging behind real-time movement. That meant customs data didn't match physical inventory timestamps, and every discrepancy generated audit flags. The buffer queues, normally rotating clean every 45 seconds, ballooned to over 4 hours. Systems meant to optimize freight delivery began cannibalizing their own logic, defaulting to failsafes not touched since 2015. By midday, the customs API was deadlocked. Full choke. Status, unresponsive on all 5 relay zones. And that's when they realized nothing was authenticating. Not the tokens, not the backups, not the override access. IT tried rebooting the primary relay and injecting new admin tokens. No response. Then they tried resetting the cert schema manually, except the schema wasn't manual. It was badge-bound, and the badge, still active but unresponsive, because the trace key embedded in it wasn't just a signature, it was a lock. a legal one, encrypted under dual auth authority using a framework approved during the 2019 audit transition. It required two conditions to revoke: a signed, notarized transfer of badge authority to a named successor, a matching dual auth ping from the architect's original credentials confirming the transition. They had neither, which meant the badge wasn't removed. It was orphaned. And when a badge like that goes dark without a certified transfer, the system doesn't default to a new owner. It shuts everything down until the ghost is addressed. They triggered what we used to call an auth cascade, not a hack, not a breach, just a collapse of trust between systems that relied on a single traceable truth and no longer had one. The trace log showed it clearly. All outbound signature requests hit a wall labeled unknown origin, badge auth mismatch. That's when the panic really started. Not just in IT, legal, compliance, procurement, vendor management. Everyone suddenly realized how much of the machine was humming on borrowed credibility, on digital scaffolding I had designed, maintained, and anchored through that one little badge they kicked off the table like it was a key card to a storage closet. Martin Bell, the company lawyer, sent out a terse internal memo. Immediate attention required. Confirm scope of badge cert authority across operational systems. Urgent escalation to forensics underway. Someone on the inside forwarded it to me. I didn't reply. By evening, half the third-party vendors had stopped syncing their endpoints. A few even initiated self-quarantine protocols. Standard procedure when trace integrity is compromised. One international shipper requested indemnity assurances before releasing their next container. The lights were still on. But inside the system? Static. Unprocessed packets stacking like firewood. No valid certs. No confirmed clock source. No trace route clean enough to pass a regulatory sniff test. And somewhere, in the glass conference room on 14, Chloe was probably leaning over the table, voice low but sharp, asking the room, why can't we just override it? And someone, maybe Martin, was having to explain, because we never actually owned it. That badge wasn't just a plastic rectangle with a QR code. It was a signature, a fingerprint, a trigger. And the second they tried to erase it without permission, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It stopped trusting them. They wanted a clean slate. Instead, they got a full-body lockout with a blinking error message that read, Trace Origin Invalid. And the only person who knew how to fix it wasn't picking up the phone. It took them until Friday to really understand what they'd done. Until then, they'd been throwing interns at logs, firing off escalation emails, rerouting calls through the same support line I built 6 years ago to handle freight misloads in Jakarta. But there's only so many times a system can say unverified source, trace blocked, before someone in legal finally looks away from their inbox and says, wait, who owned that badge again? That's when Martin's office started burning daylight. He dug into the archives, pulling up compliance documents filed during the 2019-2020 infrastructure overhaul. A boring little period most of the execs had forgotten, when we rewrote the company's entire TraceCert framework to align with a new set of cross-border customs agreements. We'd been 3 months from getting delisted from a regulatory partnership. No one wanted to own the risk, so I did. And with that came badge authority. The file he found was 37 pages long, titled Secure Trace and Credential Custodianship, Rev 1.4. Ratified by internal control. Notarized, logged under my name. Buried in Section 6, page 22 was the part that mattered. Clause 7F. All authentication hardware, including but not limited to Ops Core badge units, remain the sole property of the licensed architect unless a transfer is executed via signed and notarized agreement. In the absence of such transfer, any unilateral deactivation or confiscation shall trigger trace lock verification and immediate system fallback to zero trust protocol. No signature, no transfer. Just a CEO with a short temper, an attorney who didn't read past the first paragraph, and a badge they yanked off the table like it was a spare key fob. Even worse, my departure, unauthorized, non-consensual, and unacknowledged by the TraceCert portal, triggered the very thing Clause 7F was designed to prevent, an unverified command chain acting as if the system couldn't tell who was missing. But the system could tell, and it had already begun recalculating trust with every unanswered ping. Legal had no way to explain this to ops. How do you tell your COO that the badge was never company property, that the system was acting exactly how it was engineered to, that they had violated a chain of custody that dated back 4 years and had been reaffirmed by 3 audit boards? You don't. Not without losing credibility. So they stalled. Martin issued an internal cautionary brief suggesting the issue might relate to a deprecated credentialing protocol, which is legalese for "we don't know what we just set on fire." Chloe tried to spin it in the next executive update call. "We're exploring modernization opportunities in our access architecture. There's some legacy friction we're working through." Friction. As if the slow bleed of operational credibility was a squeaky hinge. Meanwhile, 2 port authorities in Europe suspended auto clearance privileges until the trace event was resolved. One compliance watchdog in Singapore escalated their monitoring of Darnell's cargo streams. A regulatory partner in the US, who used to CC me directly, sent a 2-line email to Chloe's team. "Your trace relay is off cert. Please confirm architect contact." They couldn't, because I wasn't there. And even if they wanted to ask me, Clause 7F was still live. I hadn't stolen a thing. I didn't alter any code. I didn't sabotage. I just walked away with what was contractually mine. Control of a signature I authored, licensed, and maintained through every compliance cycle they never bothered to learn. It was never revenge. It was custody. They buried that clause in a drawer until it became the skeleton in theirs. And now? They were locked out of their own system, with a badge they could hold in their hand but never use again. Like trying to force open a vault with a photocopy of the key. Legal had one option left: admit they didn't understand what they signed and ask for help. But by then, help wasn't free anymore. It had a name, a new signature, and a logo printed on much sharper paper. The collapse didn't explode. It arrived quiet, professional, dressed in regulatory letterhead and the kind of acronyms that make C-suites sweat through starched collars. Monday, 8:12 a.m. A transport contract with Feldstrom Logistics, $14.8 million over 18 months, was automatically flagged mid-transfer. Not by Darnell's system, but by the Federal Compliance Relay in Antwerp. The export signature didn't verify. The trace cert was missing its timestamp lock. The message on the screen was short, sterile, and devastating. Signature trace unresolved. By 9 Feldstrom's contract lawyers were on the phone with Darnell's legal. Their tone, not angry, worse, nervous. By 10 2 partner vendors had frozen their warehouse sync endpoints. Precautionary halt until badge signature validated. Which meant freight wasn't moving. And in logistics, when freight doesn't move, everything else buckles. I didn't need insider info to know. The network talks. I still had a few vendor contacts who hadn't deleted me from their phones. One forwarded me the compliance ping that went out across the global ops net. Urgent. Unusual trace signature behavior originating from Darnell Freight Technologies infrastructure. Recommend monitoring badge-linked systems for integrity breach. Escalate if no response within 48 hours. That's when it went external. Forensics from the Regulatory Oversight Bureau sent a low-profile inquiry. Just a 6-line email with a CC trail longer than a tax return. The subject line was almost polite. Please advise RE badge relay status. But the attachments told the truth. Packet logs, dropped handshake signals, a timeline of trace anomalies dating back to the exact minute I was terminated. Their systems had noticed the silence, and silence in logistics is a siren. Meanwhile, on my end, Avonridge Systems had been quietly preparing for this moment. That morning, we filed an advisory bulletin, not an attack, just informative. To all relevant partners and compliance registries, Avonridge Systems has noted recent anomalies in trace relay infrastructure associated with Darnell Freight Technologies. We have full capacity to restore trace integrity for clients operating under compliant frameworks and previously approved credential chains. For all inquiries, please contact our systems custodianship desk. We didn't name names, didn't gloat. Didn't have to, because in this industry, credibility isn't won by shouting. It's earned in the quiet moments when the system breaks, and you're the only one who can explain why. By midweek, Darnell's vendor relations inbox was flooded. Some partners were nervous, others were furious. One forwarded Chloe's last memo to me, subject line, moving forward together. The body? A single line of irony. Still moving? Darnell's press team put out a soft statement about temporary credentialing conflicts stemming from legacy systems. No one bought it. Legacy doesn't stall containers in Panama. Legacy doesn't void regulatory compliance in Hamburg. Legacy doesn't make trace systems whisper, "unknown badge owner," every time you try to push a shipment through customs. But you know what does? A live trace cert, sealed in claws, still broadcasting a signature that wasn't theirs. Mine. Back at Avonridge, we didn't spike the football. We hired 3 new support analysts. We set up a vendor intake portal, and I bought coffee for the entire team quietly because they'd been building with me for months while Chloe was gutting everything I made. She thought firing me would be a clean break. She didn't realize I'd already moved on. By the time she read our filing, I was already onboarding our 4th partner. When systems fall apart, people don't look for explanations, they look for architects. And my name was suddenly at the top of a lot of shortlists. Funny how that works. The first call came from an unlisted number, straight to voicemail. I recognized the area code. Darnell HQ. The voice on the other end was tight, clipped, no warmth left to burn. Ms. Alden, this is Reese Callahan, Chief Legal Officer at Darnell. We'd like to urgently discuss remediation options regarding the trace framework. Please call back as soon as possible. I didn't. My counsel did. An hour later, she forwarded me the transcript from her call with Reese. It wasn't long. Ms. Green, we'd like to open a dialogue regarding the system architecture deployed under Ms. Alden's tenure. I'm afraid Ms. Alden has no remaining obligations to Darnell Freight Technologies. All operational authority, including trace-linked badge systems and relay architecture, was governed under IP clauses reviewed and ratified by internal control between 2019 and 2022. Are you saying she still maintains access? I'm saying she maintains ownership and has not exercised access since her termination. That's not a breach, that's restraint. Silence. Then one last question from Reese. Is she willing to discuss a resolution? I suggest you read your own Clause 7F. Click. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt tired. They weren't calling because they respected me now. They were calling because the system had stopped respecting them. And the badge, that little rectangle they thought they confiscated, forensics had finally finished their deep dive. The trace signature was still active, not tampered, not blocked. Just rerouted, silently, legally, to a dormant control relay I'd embedded during the second relay stack migration back in Q2 2021. That relay had been registered to Avonridge Systems 4 months before Chloe took her seat. Everything was above board, transparent, filed through normal internal channels. No one had asked, no one had checked. They were too busy streamlining. Now Chloe wanted it back. Or at least wanted the optics of getting it back. She tried the back door. Media pressure. A whisper to a tech blog about bad actors weaponizing old infrastructure. A leak to a compliance journal questioning the ethics of trace-linked badge authority. We responded with one document. A red folder. Same color as the internal breach indicator flags used across ops. Inside, the notarized trace framework. The badge licensing agreement signed by 3 previous COOs. The ownership log tracing the credential relays migration into Avonridge. A copy of the system ping confirming Darnell's own audit flagged the signature as foreign registered, legally intact. And a screenshot of the core system flashing no breach detected. We didn't publish it. We just let it exist. Let people know it existed. And when Chloe's board called their emergency meeting, that red folder was already sitting at every director's seat before she even entered the room. She thought she was walking into a strategy session. She walked into an autopsy. Because they didn't just lose control, they lost the narrative. The same arrogance that let them gut my department without reading what I'd built was now the noose tightening around their quarterly forecast. Trace infrastructure isn't glamorous. It's not the kind of thing that makes headlines until it fails. And then, everyone wants to know whose name is at the bottom of the schema, and that name was mine. They couldn't override it, couldn't overwrite it, couldn't outmaneuver it. What they ignored had become unmovable. And the badge, it never needed to go anywhere. It was still there, still broadcasting, still connected to a living architecture that had outgrown them. Their empire had been built on systems I'd anchored in trust. Now all they had left was the furniture, and a red folder they couldn't unsee. The boardroom at Darnell wasn't designed for conflict. Polished wood, backlit company crest on the wall. That smug silence of generational money pretending it understood supply chain logistics. It was a room for celebrations, not consequences. But on that day, the silence was something else entirely. Every chair was full. 2 directors had flown in on overnight red-eyes. The CFO was visibly sweating through his collar. One seat remained empty until the very last moment. Chairman Delavan, 73, a man who once bragged that he could smell bullshit in a quarterly report before his coffee even hit the table. He walked in without a word and dropped a copy of the day's financial summary on the table. 7 contracts frozen. 3 key vendors terminating relationships. $2 million in fines pending regulatory arbitration. Estimated client churn, 11%. Forecasted Q2 impact, catastrophic. He sat, looked around the room, then spoke, flat and surgical. Who authorized the badge revocation? Chloe was mid-sentence before the air could breathe. There wasn't a revocation per se, just a realignment of access protocols. He didn't blink. Who authorized it? A beat. Then her voice again, cooler now, as if corporate grammar could save her. He wasn't essential. His role was legacy. The systems were being updated. The badge was an artifact. That's when legal moved. No words, no throat clearing, just a slow slide across the table, the red folder, open to a tabbed section marked Custodianship Rights, Clause 7F. The General Counsel read one line aloud. That badge governed the entire trace relay. It is legally locked to Ms. Alden's signature. Confiscating it without authorized transfer triggered trace lock. All subsequent system failure stems from that event. No one moved. The consultants in the room, the ones Chloe had brought in with their 6-month roadmaps and their buzzword padded invoices, suddenly found the grain in the wood fascinating. The CFO looked like he wanted to die in his chair. Chloe's jaw set. We had to move forward. She wasn't willing to align with the new vision. DeLevin tilted his head. The new vision? That includes triggering a system-wide trust collapse across multi-jurisdictional freight channels. That includes hemorrhaging vendor trust and regulatory status because you didn't know what was in a badge protocol. I made the best decision with the information I had, she said, still composed, still believing spin could outpace accountability. No, he said. You made a decision without understanding the infrastructure that carried this company. You made it because you thought domain expertise was dead weight, and now we're bleeding because the system doesn't believe in us anymore. She opened her mouth again. He raised a hand. Not in anger, in finality. Get out. Not yelled, not even particularly loud, but it carved through the room like a scalpel. No one moved to stop her. She stood slowly, her face stone but cracking in the corners. She looked around as if someone might offer a hand. They didn't. She walked out. No applause, no stifled sobs. Just the click of her heels and the quiet hum of the door resetting behind her. Delavan waited a full 5 seconds before speaking again. Draft the recovery roadmap. I want direct counsel with Avonridge by tomorrow. No NDAs, no hubris, just results. Legal nodded. They've already been briefed. Ms. Alden hasn't sought damages. She doesn't need to, he said almost to himself. She left with the architecture and the narrative. There was no vote, no ceremony, just a resignation accepted by absence. The badge had become more than hardware. It was proof of authorship, of foresight. And for Chloe, it was the blade she never saw, quiet, exact, and wielded by the very system she thought she owned. 2 weeks later, the noise died. No more pingbacks from audit chains. No more compliance alerts fluttering through the regulatory ecosystem like digital distress signals. No more late-night texts from old colleagues trying to pretend they hadn't watched me get shoved out the door. Just one update. A line item in a state database most people never check. Filing. Avonridge Systems, Inc., position, Strategic Systems Director. Effective date, immediate notes, badge authority restored. No announcement, no triumphant rollout, no dramatic PR redemption arc, just 3 words and a timestamp. And with that, the loop closed. Darnell's systems, now visibly degraded, began to drift beyond salvage. 3 high-profile clients pivoted to new logistics partners within 48 hours. Stock dropped 18% by end of quarter. Analysts flagged the sudden operational opacity as potentially systemic. Internally, a reshuffling was underway, some new exec brought in with a mandate to restore confidence. A consultant-heavy name, no backbone, no roadmap. And Chloe? She disappeared from LinkedIn, no new position, no farewell post, not even a profile photo, like she never existed. But her signature still sat on the badge revocation order. And that line, her line, was forever cross-referenced with the moment the system stopped trusting its own infrastructure. The board never issued a formal statement. They couldn't. Not without admitting they had fired the person who wrote the architecture they ran on. Not without revealing that the badge, an object they thought was just an access card, was the final authority in a system that measured integrity before input. Meanwhile, Avonridge kept growing, quietly. We onboarded 2 more clients that month. Neither asked what had happened at Darnell. They just asked if we could guarantee trace stability. I said yes, because I could. And clause 7F? Untouched, unchallenged, still valid, still mine. No one dared poke at it now. As for the badge, it sits in a fireproof safe in my office, silent, inert, but alive in the way only true architecture is. Not because it has power, but because it was designed with purpose, because it was trusted, and because it still remembers who earned that trust. I never retaliated, never went back, never made a scene. I didn't need to. Because sometimes you don't have to burn the building down to show them where the blueprint failed. You just take the key and walk away and let the silence do what words never could. Finish the trace.